Tonight, I am going to do the last chapter of the book Compassion Now. And this chapter, it's chapter 4, is called Chenrezik, Practice of Love and Compassion. To begin with, he talks about meditation practice in referring to chanting Chenrezik. And I wanted to point this out that frequently you hear listening and hearing meditation. Then meditation means more than just shamatha meditation. Meditation is really any type of practice where it involves concentration. And so chanting Chenrezik Puja requires concentration. Therefore, it is a meditation practice. So this is important to remember. Actually, when I began, it's listening and hearing, contemplation, and then practice. So now we're doing a little listening and hearing. When we're done, you can contemplate what I've said, and then later on we can practice. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that distinction here. He says it's easy to undervalue our experience, what has happened to us and what we have done. I'm going to use the term sell ourselves short. What he's talking about here is that if we look at our actions of body, speech, and mind, we frequently do not even bring out times when we've done things that have been beneficial to other people. And we think, oh, I don't have any compassion. Oh, I'm not a good person. I don't, da, 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 da. And if we really look at ourselves closely, we have all done a lot of things that have benefited other people. And it's a long list of things that other people have done that we have benefited from, because just about everything in our lives have been touched by other people. And it's easy to either not be aware of it or push it aside as not being important, because a lot of it is subtle. But it's very important to do this and to realize that even though your motivation may not have been pure, the results of your action was beneficial to other people. And even though the motivation of other people may have not been pure, that you have benefited from them. I'm going to prepare a shopping list for groceries when I get finished with this and go grocery shopping tomorrow. And everything that I buy in the store, many, many, many people have been involved with it. First of all, people in the store. Secondly, the truckers that bring it to the store. Then if it's fresh, the people that have grown it, the fuel that it took to transport it and to grow it, and on and on and on and on with whatever it is that we use. It's involved many, many, many people that have worked hard. We're benefiting from all of this. So it's really important, he feels, to keep this in mind and contemplate this. This will help us appreciate what other people have done and develop compassion for other people, and also compassion for ourselves when we see that we actually have done things that have been beneficial to other people. He says, bring it to life. I had the good fortune, maybe the good karma, to go to a retreat led by Thich Nhat Hanh. It was a 6-day retreat, as I recall. There was one exercise that was led by Sister Chan Kong, who is a very close associate with him for decades and decades. And she did a practice called touching the roots. And in that practice, she would just talk about the roots of the good things in our lives, where they come from. And she would just go down the list and she would talk about it this way, that the people that have produced the food that we have eaten, for instance, then going down the line like I did about how it came into being, they worked so hard, so cheerfully, joyfully, so that we could have a good meal as a result of this. And she would just talk on and on and on about the hard work and the joyful work that these people cheerfully did that we could benefit from. Us Americans, and maybe the Canadians too, are attached to cars. Well, these cars are touched by thousands, hundreds of thousands of people between the extraction of the raw resources, the energy, building the plants where they are assembled, the assembly of the parts to the sales point where you buy the car. And then there are the roads that have to be maintained so that you can drive a car. When they first invented cars, there were no paved roads, to the best of my knowledge. So roads had to be built that were all weather roads, and on and on and on. And so this is touching the roots is really a good contemplation. Think about all the things that you find that are good in your life, beneficial in your life, and how so many people had to work on these things coming into being, realizing that actually the world is much better than it might seem, and that there is a lot of compassion in the world, even if the motivation might not be pure, even if it is that they were doing these things because they needed a job and needed the money. So meditating on Chenrezi, who is he? If we can meditate on him, this can help us develop more compassion in our own hearts. Chenrezi is, quote, the embodiment of all the compassion that resides within the hearts of all Buddhas, of all the 10 directions and all times. So he is everywhere. Wherever there is space, there is Chenrezi. He's in all times, past, present, and future. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche would teach that Chenrezi is a Buddha, a fully enlightened being who appears as a bodhisattva. Gyalwang Karmapa mentions 4 symbolic meanings to his appearance. There's much more to his appearance than these 4, but he stresses these, so I'm going to talk about these 4. The first is that his brilliant white color. It's like the full moon. This indicates that his compassion radiates everywhere to everyone like the full moon. It doesn't fluctuate. We might not be aware of his compassion because of our confusion, but it is there everywhere constantly. The second is his 4 arms. They represent the 4 immeasurables. I will have to say I've read some other explanations of his 4 arms that have a slightly different take on it, but I'm not going to go there. The Karmapa says that it's not because he's constantly working for the benefit of sentient beings, which he is, but that's not what his 4 arms are for. They represent the 4 immeasurables, and he can't say which arm is associated with which immeasurable. The 4 immeasurables are immeasurable love, which is wanting beings to be happy and to have the causes of happiness. The second one is compassion and wishing beings to be free of suffering and free of the causes of suffering. The third is joy, wishing that all beings have immeasurable joy. And the last is equanimity, and that is wishing that all beings do not distinguish between friend and enemy, between those that are close and those that are distant. And Chenrezi has that perfect equanimity. In terms of joy, Chenrezi's mind is constantly blissful, the bliss of a Buddha. And his compassion is immeasurable, and his love is immeasurable. Now, the third is he is not in Dharma robes. He is, quote, in the costume of a lay person. Now, that surprised me because I've never seen a lay person dressed like Chenrezi. The point that he's making here is that he's not in Dharma robes. He is in the clothing of a peaceful bodhisattva. And what Karmapa says about this is, this means of the beings that are tamed by Chenrezi, more are non-monastics. So I think that what he is getting at here is that a lot of monastics would be doing other practices as well as Chenrezi. For instance, in 3-year retreat, we did a practice called Red Chenrezi, which is quite different from the Chenrezi practice that we do here Sunday morning. And then here we do also, or have done in the past, the Nyungne practice, which is a practice of 1,000-arm Chenrezi. And then there are lots of other practices that advanced students can do. It doesn't mean it works better for non-monastics to do Chenrezi in terms of the results. It just means this is a easy entry-level practice for lay people to do. Rinpoche has said, this is Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, has said that it's hard to go wrong practicing Chenrezi, that if you're approaching it the wrong way, it will self-correct. I think a direct quote of his is Chenrezi is harmless, whereas some of the other Vajrayana practices, if you have the wrong attitude and practice the wrong way, it can cause harm to the practitioner. The fourth quality is that the name is a description of his qualities rather than an ordinary name. Chenrezi means the all-seeing one, or the eyes that are always seeing beings at all times. His eyes, as Karmapa says, blink, but he is always seeing with them because they're the eyes of wisdom. Another Tibetan name for him is Mid-Zum, which means eyes never shut. So again, this is emphasizing that his compassion is unceasing and unfluctuating, like the moon. So all of these refer to his qualities, the qualities of great compassion. And it's important to meditate on these qualities as well as his form. And in fact, these wisdom qualities are more important than his form. Another way of putting this is that we don't want to solidify his form and just focus on his form. It's symbolic, and we need to keep in mind what they are representing. At this point, he tells this story about this charlatan Lama. He says it's funny, but it has a deeper meaning. Personally, I didn't find it that funny a story. I found it a sad story. But anyway, that's my own take on that. And the reason is that you see this in many religions that are practiced around the world, that there are charlatans that take it to very bad places and give religions a very bad name because of their behavior. With that commentary in mind, let's go on to the story. So this Lama claimed to have gone to Amitabha's pure realm of Sukhavati and met Amitabha. He calls Amitabha by the name of Abu Ulu. And Karmapa felt that was odd. I think it's odd, but I also find it interesting that I believe Karmapa was given the name Abu Gaga by his sister when he was quite young. So there you've got that Abo, A-B-O. Don't have a clue what these words mean. But anyway, Amitabha is asleep when this Lama comes across him. Tara wakes up Amitabha and tells him that this Lama is going back to the world of humans and he needs some tea before he goes. And so he summons Vajrapani to go into the kitchen and make tea. Vajrapani is dark blue in color, and this Lama says that, well, the reason why he's dark blue in color is because of all the smoke in the kitchen. Then he summons Chenrezi. This is Amitabha in the charlatan Lama's story. Amitabha summons Chenrezi to go get sampa, which is a basic food of the Tibetans. It's ground barley flour, and the barley has been roasted before it's ground. And of course, sampa is a very fine white powder. So the Lama says this is why Chenrezi is white, because he's covered with sampa flour. This is quite bizarre. Then before he leaves, after having his tea and sampa, he claims that Amitabha is cold. They're having a cold winter in Dewa Chen or Sukhavati, and that he needs to have something to keep him warm. So this Lama then tells, when he comes back to Earth, he tells people that he needs to collect lamb or sheep skins of the highest quality and take them to Amitabha, who is cold. And Karmapa says that the number of skins that he requests seem to vary from time to time. And of course, the whole thing was a scam. Now, here is what Karmapa says about this story. Quote, The point of the story is that this is the kind of thing that comes from paying too much attention to appearances of deities without any recollection of the meaning of that appearance. First of all, the enlightened beings in Amitabha's Pure Land, they're not cold. They don't need clothing to keep warm. If you would make an offering to them, it would be so you can accumulate merit, not because they need it. We have food offerings that we make sometimes to these deities, and it's not because they need it, it's because they're hungry or anything. It's because we need to accumulate merit by making offerings. In a more elaborate puja, when you're making these offerings of drinking water, washing water, flowers, incense, and going right down the line to food, frequently that you'll be chanting verses that say something like, even though these deities have no need for food, we are offering this in order for, and they are accepting it in order for us to accumulate merit. And the idea of all of this is just so, I think it's quite bizarre, but it shows what can happen if you take these things too literally. So keep in mind that all of this has to do with their qualities. They're made out of light. As a result that they're made out of light, they don't need food, they don't need clothing. So don't solidify things and think that they're just like human beings, even though they might have a anthropomorphic form. So then he talks about spiritual guides or spiritual friends. Kalyana Mitra is the Sanskrit name. And he says that Chenrezi, bodhisattvas like Chenrezi, are spiritual friends. And he lists 4 types of spiritual friends. The first is an actual person, a living person that you could meet, talk with, receive instructions from, and so forth. The second is the teachings themselves, the Dharma, that they can arise and be as spiritual friends, help you understand what to accept, what to reject, and so forth. The third is one's own mind. The more we tame our minds, and the more attention we pay to what's going on in our minds and what's going on outside of our minds, the more we start to see and learn. And then the fourth one is the spiritual friend within all appearances. And this comes into play at higher levels where whatever it is that we are experiencing is teaching us and can be very helpful to move us along the path and increase our realization. Gyalwang Karmapa reiterates or emphasizes here that to achieve liberation, we have to exert our own effort. It isn't that it can be accomplished for us by someone else, but the way we can use these bodhisattvas like Chenrezi is as examples. It's very good to emulate these examples of these deities that we practice like Chenrezi. Spiritual biographies are frequently called namtar, which means example. And so that's why these are written to help give us guidance, to become a spiritual friend that teaches us what to accept and what to avoid. So reading and studying about Chenrezi is also very helpful. One of my favorite books about Chenrezi is by Bokar Rinpoche, Chenrezi, Lord of Love. And that's a good book to go to for more information, more inspiration about Chenrezi. In terms of actual flesh and blood beings, the Dalai Lama is considered an emanation of Chenrezi in human form. Gyalwang Karmapa is considered an emanation of Chenrezi, but he didn't mention that. He does talk about, though, the first 7 years of his life when he was living in a nomad family, and that his mother and his grandmother were constantly repeating the 6-syllable mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And so he grew up with this constantly being repeated in the background. And he felt this was a very good experience for him. He called it his only inheritance from his parents. And this reminded me of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's sister, Pema, who lived at KTD for a few years. And she married a Chinese person back in Tibet. And I think they moved out of the area, and Rinpoche lost contact with each other. She had her own life. And then one day she showed up at KTD, I think surprising everyone. And so she had not had much of an education in terms of mundane education or Buddhist education. But whenever Rinpoche gave a teaching, she would always be sitting there with her prayer wheel, spinning it around, and a mala in her other hand, just spinning her prayer wheel and saying a mantra. And this is the kind of situation that Gyalwang Karmapa grew up in for the first 7 years, with his mother and grandmother probably spinning a prayer wheel if their hands were empty. And if they were working, probably saying mantra as they worked. Gyalwang Karmapa then talks about giving this reading transmission for the Chenrezik practice that we do. And what a reading transmission is just reading it, every word in the text, even the words that aren't chanted. And it's usually read at a very, very fast pace. And this transmits the blessings, because the person that gives the reading transmission then received the reading transmission from another person. And it goes way back to the author of the text. And that goes way back to the Buddha, even if he was not the author of the text. But the blessings go way back, this unbroken transmission. And the text was written by Tang Tong Gyalpo, Thangtong Gyalpo, who lived in the 15th century. He was a Mahasiddha, and he built some metal bridges. He was renowned for that. And so I am going to go here to a screenshot of what he looks like and then talk about this a little bit. If you notice, he has in his left hand a short length chain. So he built these bridges, and I never seen a picture one or drawing of one, but when you see these pictures of him, he has this length of chain in his hand, and I suspect they were some type of a suspension bridge that must have been innovative for the time. He's also dressed like a yogi if you look at his hair and his bare chest. He's not a monk. So that is who the author of the text is. And now I'm going to go on with the teaching. He finishes up then, after he gives this reading transmission, with saying that we live in a dark age, which is characterized by diminishing resources, a sick earth. He talks about the buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. These teachings were given in 2010, and in the last 12 years, it's become more obvious than ever about the dangers of global warming, among other things, and drought, flood, and so on. And he also says that the inhabitants, I believe he's referring to primarily the human inhabitants of the earth, are afflicted with thick ignorance. This is a dark age in terms of Buddhist cosmology, the dregs of time, and dregs is used here in the book. And on the other hand, in these times, to even recollect loving kindness and compassion is a tremendous virtue. So he feels that giving this talk and having people there listening to him is excellent, that he's planted the seeds of compassion and loving kindness in the minds of the listener and then the reader. He thanks the Foundation of Universal Responsibility for sponsoring the program. And they were in turn started by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I believe these were held in probably Delhi, India. His final advice is, don't hold the compassion inside of you. You have to let it out. If you hold it inside, it becomes a source of suffering. You take the suffering in, and then you feel you can't do anything about it. And there it sits, and it just makes you more and more unhappy, more miserable. So all you have to do is start with small things, doing things that you can do, very simple things. That if you think about all the things you can't do, it very quickly gets overwhelming. But if you think about the things that you can do and you have altruistic motivation, which is bodhicitta, then whatever you do, whatever you think even, can be beneficial. If you think, may this action benefit others, just that simple motivation, may this action that I'm doing, it could be washing the dishes, could be shoveling the snow, could be anything. Think that may this be beneficial to other people. It may not immediately benefit other people, but it will in the long run. Even if it's just training your mind to think along this motivation of may what I do be beneficial to others. So this will lead to long-term happiness. This is what we're looking for. And it's the same thing with compassion. If we think, may this reduce the suffering of other beings. The question is that it's more of a statement. I feel uneasy about this idea that the deity doesn't need the offering, but they do it so that you can accumulate merit. Now, there are different kinds of offerings. If we're actually making offerings, like you're at KTD and you donate money, they will use that to, if nothing else, pay the electric bill, pay the insurance, pay the maintenance, pay for the food, and all kinds of other expenses. So at that level, the donations are greatly appreciated. But from the level of Chenrezik, he doesn't eat, he's not cold, he doesn't need a place to stay, he's everywhere, he's nowhere. What would he do with an offering? He's not going to put it in an IRA. The person just said that they have difficulty in visualizations, and have mentioned that before in this discussion about visualizations. It has just seemed to compound it. And my answer is this. Karmapa says in this chapter that it's more important to concentrate on the qualities rather than the actual physical attributes of the deity. You can get hung up on the physical attributes and not pay much attention to the qualities of limitless loving kindness, limitless compassion, limitless wisdom, being able to see past, present, and future, see what's beneficial for beings and provide it, and so forth. The comment was that the Earth's population in 1400 was roughly 500 million people, and now 600-700 years later is 8 billion, a factor of 16 times. Where is this going? This seems like a very difficult place that it's going. And the questioner said that it kind of gets him upset and worried and concerned and so forth. My answer is, or what Galwan Karmapa has said, is that this bears concern, but we have to start with doing what we can do. That part of it is individual responsibility, and to try to use fewer resources as you go about your everyday life. Be a wise shopper. Those of you that have been to my house have noticed I have a lot of antique furniture. Well, antique furniture takes no resources other than the transportation to get them from where you bought them to your home. And I've done a lot of restoration in my home, and a lot of it is antique hardware and lighting and so forth. I can't say that I own an electric vehicle, but I've sure thought about it. I've got solar electric panels on the center roof. I have LED light bulbs everywhere because they're so much more efficient. And so there are many things that we can do to help conserve Earth resources. Myself, this is my own suggestion. What the world needs are more monks and nuns because they don't have children. So when while you're alive, aspire in your next life to be a monk or a nun. But the point is that don't get hopeless, because if you're hopeless, it just leads to a very dark place, and that does not benefit anybody.